Well, this is the third of a series on stewardship, and you don't like to have to be invited to talk about stewardship. That's not the topic that you just kind of feel jazzed about. I know that when I thought about what I would like to do, it was before this assignment came, and I thought, well, the church is going through transition. I used to do a lot of transition sermons when I was working for the presbytery. I could pull one of those out. But no, it's stewardship season. So guess what? We're going to do stewardship. And yay. And so we have been given some verses in Proverbs that we're going to read together. They're in the bulletin. And I'm going to add some verses later on from the gospel. But from Proverbs chapter 3, we read these verses. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I will give it to you, when you already have it with you. And so the theme is we give because the world needs it. And the world is a needy place, is it not? Just read the paper, turn on the TV, turn on your computer news feed, and you see these humanitarian crises around the world unfolding. Heartbreaking, Ukraine, the Holy Land. And it is so unremitting that it just numbs us after a while. We begin with prayer meetings when a new crisis emerges. I remember well when Russia invaded Ukraine. We had several prayer meetings around the city. Tammy and I went to them. Hit me particularly closely because my grandparents all came from Ukraine. And so we were part of that. And then when the crisis in the Holy Land occurred, there's all kinds of prayers that are gathered by Arabs and Jews and Christians around the desire for peace. And yet we don't really know what that entails, but we do know that we want peace on earth. It is deep within the heart of everyone to desire that. And yet we grow weary, do we not? Compassion fatigue sets in because these problems do not go away quickly. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance goes to the places where disasters happen, and they report that usually there's a whole lot of activity when a disaster first strikes, but then after a while people leave, and there's nobody there to help rebuild. And that's one of PDA's callings, is to help to repair the world through staying with those who suffer through the long haul. Now, our text from Proverbs makes clear that the obligation lies upon the people of God to help others if we have the means to do so, to think about others and not just ourselves. We face headwinds, do we not, around the world, really, with these movements, nationalistic, that get expressed, for instance, in our country in terms of slogans like America First. It's about me first. And, it sounds rather juvenile, doesn't it? I mean, that's what little kids do, me first. And yet we have an appeal that seems to be striking a chord with, even up into our halls of power. So there's arguments about whether we should be trying to help the people in Ukraine, trying to help the people in Gaza, trying to help the suffering in Israel. And people are saying, well, that's not my problem. That is inconsistent with the mandate that we hear from the book of Proverbs in our scripture today. On October 3rd, just about 3 weeks ago, I was struck by a column in the Washington Post by Kate Cohen. And the title of her column was, America Doesn't Need More God, It Needs More Atheists. So, why did she say that? That column came out just a few days before this brutal attack of Hamas in the Gaza region against Israel. And we know that those who are perpetrating that and who are rising up in response to it both claim to be motivated by God, that they're doing the will of God. And perhaps that's what Kate Cohen might have in mind, but more of what she has in mind is this, that studies have shown that people who are atheists tend to become more involved in trying to help their fellow human being. Yeah, what? Shouldn't be that way, should it? But the reason that she proposes is that people of faith all too easily say, well, that's God's worry. That's God's business. Whereas people who are atheists say, if we don't do it, nobody will. Now, it's a shame when the people of God are the last to respond rather than the first to respond to the needs of the world. Now, a few weeks earlier, I've been following her a little bit. She's a wonderful writer, a lapsed Jew. But she had a column in August that said, go back to church. So it seems like a different kind of a counsel. And then in brackets afterwards, or something like it. And the point she was making there was, after the pandemic, so many people have quit going to church or quit gathering with people who are part of a community that is dedicated to making a difference in the world. And when we're not part of a common project to address the suffering of the world, we tend to become complacent. We tend to become self-centered. And thus, the world loses that which we could give. Come back to church, she says. Come back to whatever organization it is that motivates you to do work together in solidarity with the suffering world. I'll put it this way in more Christian terms. The world needs the church to be truly the church for the world's sake. The world needs the church to be truly the church, the people of God that are shaped by words like we read earlier, and by words that we're going to be reading a little bit later from Jesus himself. There's a theologian named Stanley Hauerwas who says that the most important political work that the church can do is to be true to itself. When the church is true to itself, it will not only care for the needing and the hurting within its own walls, but also beyond, because that's who we're called to be. And so the reason we give to the church is not merely to support the church for its own sake, but to help the church to be truly the church for the sake of the world. We support the church because the world needs the church. Now, that need was powerfully illustrated right here at Hot Metal a few years ago. A young woman was seriously injured by gunshot in a neighborhood not too far from here. And because of things like gang stuff, the people around her didn't want to go to the police with her. They didn't want to go to the hospital with her. And they thought, where could we go? This woman is bleeding out. Where did they come? They came here because they knew this was a place that was safe. They knew that it was a place that would take action. And they knew that it was a place that was open on Thursday nights. Right? Because Hot Metal was faithfully doing its work as a church, the world was made better for it. It was a powerful, powerful thing. Made the news, you know. Hot Metal doesn't make the news that often, but that time it did. A place, and probably because of Hot Metal, that woman is alive today. The world knows that the church can be counted on to respond to the needs of the community when the church actually starts by taking care of its own neighborhood and its own members. A second century historian named Tertullian was trying to give an account for why it was that this strange little movement called Christianity grew into such a huge thing so quickly. And he observed that the people in the church were notorious for the way that they took care of those who were in need, first within their own community and then around them. And that was in a world where there was no government welfare. You either begged or you died if you couldn't provide for yourself. And so it was that the Christian movement was a movement that took care of those who were on the margins, those who were on the outside of the economic engines of the world, and said, you here have a place of safety, of security, of well-being. And so Tertullian reports that the word on the lips of the watching world was, see how the Christians love each other. They take care of each other. See how the Christians love each other. Isn't that the word that we hear about the church today? Not always. See how the Christians love each other? Martin Luther King Jr. said that Sunday morning at 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour of the week in America. Hardly a hallmark of Christians loving each other. And if we're honest, people who claim to be Christian demonize each other all too often for how they look, for who they love, for what they accept, or for what they deny. We are more likely to love people who agree with our politics than we are to love people who love Jesus. And that's not as it should be. The world needs a church that rises above the polarized politics in which the world is embedded and stretches out its arms in love to everybody. No exceptions. Safe space for all. A haven, a sanctuary, a refuge from all that attacks, from all that destroys and deprives and demonizes. The church is the place that stands against that kind of division. The world needs the church to be the church. So giving to support the church is only incidentally about making sure that the church itself survives and thrives. That's good, it should. But it's more significant to think about it as an assurance that the world's needs that can only be met by the church are in fact being met. It's about making sure that there is a place that will welcome a gunshot victim when they have nowhere else to turn. That's the church, being true to its identity. Of course, the statement that the world needs the church immediately begs this question. What kind of church? What kind of church? The newly elected Speaker of the House this week, commenting on this week's tragic mass shooting in Maine, said, "At the end of the day, the problem is the human heart." I'm quoting. It's not guns. We have to protect the right of the citizens to protect themselves. And that's the Second Amendment. Now, this guy is a well-known advocate of the church, highly visible member of a big, big church. And he's echoing what he heard in church when he says it's more important that people have their guns than that they don't. Is that the kind of church that is needed? And I'm not trying to cast aspersion on the particular guy. He is a product of a church that has a view in which many people are steeped. I propose to you that it's not just any church that the world needs, but it's a church that is faithful to the teachings of Jesus in ways that perhaps we miss sometimes. Now, the Presbyterian Church USA, our denomination, one of our denominations, has had for the past 4 or 5 years a program that has been advocated called the Matthew 25 program. Hot Metal has signed on to it. And it's a program that says the church ought to be taking its cues from what Jesus has to say about how we are to live in the world in Matthew chapter 25. Now let me read a little bit of Matthew 25, and that'll give us a little bit of an idea of Jesus' program for the church. He's talking about the final judgment, and he says, "The king will say to those on his right, 'Enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what's coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation. You've done good. And here's why. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was homeless, and you gave me a room. I was shivering, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me.'" Then these people are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you?" Then the king will say, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, That was me. You did it to me. I'm going to read that last sentence again. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me. There's a blueprint for the church that the denomination is lifting up. The challenge is, how well are we living into it? And one of the most striking features of that teaching is that this work being done for Jesus, to Jesus, in the world, is done without religious intent. They're surprised to learn that there was anything about it that had to do with Jesus. That wasn't in their mind. They were simply trying to express solidarity with fellow humans who were struggling. They were trying to be salt and light, to use another of Jesus' metaphors in the world. They were just trying to do what people should do to those who are in need. A church like that is embedded in the world rather than apart from it. It does the work of Jesus by meeting needs without conditions, without exceptions. As I was thinking about these things, I was reminded of something that some of us are old enough to remember nearly 40 years ago. Before the World Wide Web made it possible for people to sing together across continents and whatnot, there was an event held in London and Philadelphia simultaneously back in 1985 in order to try to rally people together to meet a need, a crying need in Africa of a famine in Ethiopia. It ended up raising something on the order of $400 million. It was an amazing event. It was called Live Aid. Anybody remember that? Yeah, we're old enough to remember that. You got it. So what happened was you had these concerts simultaneously happen around the world. The biggest ones were in London and Philadelphia, but they also were in the USSR, in Japan, in Australia, Austria, Canada, Norway, all over the world. Simultaneously, musicians gathered together, and they had a song that was written by Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson called "We Are the World." And in that song, they expressed solidarity alongside rather than some kind of charity from above. They're saying that the Ethiopian famine was not their problem over there, that we come in to be their saviors. It's our problem. We are the world. And when we know that we are the world, we can be in the world in a way that is redemptive to the world. So perhaps the kind of church that the world needs can get a clue from Bob Geldof and Live Aid, Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. I will call it, and it's kind of an inelegant name, I'll call it the We Are the World Church. We are the world church. Such a church follows the blueprint that Jesus gives in Matthew 25, coming alongside those who suffer with the help they need, not to proselytize or to colonize Christian communities, but simply to express solidarity with the suffering in the world. And when we do that, we are serving Jesus, especially when we're least aware of it. Now, the world desperately needs this We Are the World church. To support such a church is to meet some of the most urgent needs of the world. A church can do so much more corporately than any of us can do individually. Which of us on our own would be willing, let alone able, to take in a woman who is suffering a nearly fatal gunshot wound? Alas, too often people choose to support a church because of what they get out of it. They like the sermon, they like the music, the politics, the youth group, the theology, you name it. The church meets their felt needs, and so they support it. It's a transactional model. I get what I pay for. But we're talking about something very different here, aren't we? We're talking about supporting a church not for what it gives to us, but for what it does for the world. And I can think of no congregation that pound for pound does more for the world around it than hot metal. None. Maybe our name isn't the We Are the World Church, Appropriately, we took our name from our place in the world because we began, first of all, meeting under the hot metal bridge. We support hot metal, not because of what it gives us, but for what it gives to the world. I'm proud to say that I believe hot metal is a We Are the World church. Thanks be to God. Amen.